Hey everybody, welcome to the 10 Laws podcast with East Forest. I'm East Forest, happy to be with you today. Today I have a conversation with someone named Marc Lesser. I met him at the Esalen Institute when I was out there with Marissa Rada-Wepner and we were doing our retreat. He and his wife, I think, was doing a retreat, but he does retreats there as well. And we got to know each other in a dining room and had some great conversations. And he has a Zen background and mindfulness. He's an author and speaker. And so we just hit it off. And so I thought it would be cool to get him on because I always like to dig into people who have different perspectives on mindfulness, emotional intelligence, these sorts of things. So he's done some work with Google, with this sort of search inside yourself program, mindfulness-based emotional intelligence training. Yeah, well, anyway, he's got a new book. It's called The 7 Practices of a Mindful Leader. And I thought we got it to get into a lot of really interesting things. So I think you will enjoy it. But I also just want to let you know I got some new things that came up that I'm going to be out there in the U.S. and I want to let you know so you can interface and link up if it fits your world. One piece of news is that the fall Southern Utah East Forest retreat is finally back on. We got that back on the schedule, so you can now sign up. And that's it's our 4th time, I think. It's going to be really amazing. I'm really looking forward to returning. And housing, some people like their particular housing choices. So we have like the teepee, 2 teepees and the wall tents. And then we've got the private rooms and the suites and the cabins. And there's only a few of each. So, it's the kind of thing that's first come, first serve. If you do think you want to come in the fall, it's going to be the last weekend in September of 2019 out here in Southern Utah. You can head over to eastforest.org, hit that retreat tab, and you'll see more information. And you can put down your deposit if you'd like to come. But we'll also be doing, speaking of Esalen, we'll be at Esalen as well for the summer solstice, which is June 20th through 23rd. Solstice is on the 21st, I believe. Actually, I think we're there the 21st or the 23rd. It's the Friday to Sunday. You fly into San Francisco or San Jose. They even have a shuttle. You pop down there. We do a retreat weekend, lots of East Forest music and co-creative things. And of course, the hot springs there. And then you bounce out on Sunday. So that's happening as well this year. And that's actually going to be the Chapter 3 release of Ram Dass album. But the Chapter 2 release is coming right up on March 22nd. It's a Friday. But on March 20th will be the release event for that. And that's going to be at the Tree Fort Music Fest in Boise, Idaho. I'm doing a big ceremony concert at the El Kura Shrine. It's a Shriner's place. And it's actually my favorite venue at all of Tree Fort. It's one of the coolest venues, the coolest sound systems. It's really big. And since we're first, it'll be clean and the floor will be clean. So we can all do a ceremony concert where you can sit down or lie down on the floor, do it in the round, and you can have the full-blown experience. So if you want to come out to the Tree Fort Music Fest, it is my favorite music festival all year because it's urban. You just walk around the city and see all this amazing curated emerging music. And you can stay in an Airbnb or a hotel. You don't have to camp. And there's all sorts of other amazing things there, like Yoga Fort, which I'll also be playing for the following days. So all that's at eastforest.org. Right after that, I'll be in Dallas, Texas on March 30th and Austin, Texas on March 31st. And then I'll be doing a little tour out on the East Coast. There's going to be more dates added. They're not announced yet, but one of them is April 13th, New York City. That's with Morning Altars. And then a few more dates, and then over to April 20th in Chicago, Ram Dass Retreat, first week of May, Mammoth Yoga Festival, June 13th through 16th, and then Esalen, June 21st to 23rd. And then our big Chapter 4, the big release event for the Ram Dass East Forest album is August 9th in Los Angeles. So there's a lot going on, and there's going to be more added. We're just sort of ramping up and getting into the year. And I'm looking forward to integrating all this new material and continuing these ceremony concerts with you and continuing to develop It is a technology of an experience. So we'll get right into this conversation. I'm coming to you from Boulder, Utah. I came down here for a few weeks before I have to go back up to Boise for Tree Fort and then back out on the road. But it's been good. It's pretty dead down here. It's still winter. It's actually snowing right now. And the day after I got here, I came over Boulder Mountain at the right time. It was pretty sketchy. It was like -1 up there and slick. But we got massive amounts of snow just after that. Up here at the ranch on the mountain that I'm staying at, I think we had drifts of 4 to 5 feet. So, and then when that starts to melt, it just becomes mud. So it's been an interesting experience being here, but it's very nourishing to be around the hills and the mountains, and it's very, very quiet this time of year. There aren't a lot of out-of-towners or tourists, and it's always good to get into that expansiveness. So I encourage you, even in the winter, if you can find a place to get out and reconnect with that which is still wild, to do it, because it can ignite something in you. In this kind of space out here, you get away from your routines and other patterns, and sort of your own core habits and things that might be running in the background become exposed. And that act of mindfulness, of me noticing that, is powerful. And that's something I got to talk to Marc about, is what is mindfulness? And not in a cute way, but really, is what kind of traps are there in that, and how does that actually manifest in our lives, and what do we do with it, and all this kind of stuff. So let's just get right into it. I hope to see you guys soon. This is Marc Lesser on the 10 Laws Podcast.
The soul takes birth, takes incarnation to learn.
Good. Well, thanks for giving me some time, and it was great to meet you at Esalen. And I've had the opportunity just to dig around a bit in your your digital world, so to speak. But I do look forward to checking out the new book. But there's a lot of crossover with what you're up to in sort of things I'm interested in, music and just consciousness and just how that affects our day-to-day life. And so I thought it could be fun to get into some of this.
Yeah, for sure. That sounds great. No, I felt a clear connection with the work that you do, and your, it seemed to me like you're in the business of, transformation, helping people connect with each other through music and words.
Yeah, and I'm also very interested in how we're using music, words, just sort of the intersection of technology, nature, our human experience, and some of the oldest technologies we have are, things like Zen, and ideas like mindfulness, and they're very hot topics today as well. And so, one thing, if you don't, we could just get right into it.
Let's do it. Let's do it.
Mindfulness for me is something that's very active in my own life. I mean, I think about it, ironically, and I try to put it into practice into my own life. And for me, it's sort of like, if I had to define it, I think it'd be sort of an awareness of my awareness. It's sort of like that witness consciousness of myself that can see my emotional states, that can sort of analyze in some ways, or just be in that witness seat. And when I was working with on this recent album with Ram Dass recently, he talks about that a lot in the songs that come up, this idea of the witness. And he talks about it in different ways, sort of like soul consciousness, the witness consciousness, and that being a place of loving awareness, like the seat of our soul. But I just would love to get into you a little bit about, I know this is a big subject, but just sort of like what mindfulness is to you, and just start from that point, because I know for a lot of people it's a common word,
Yeah.
and it's used a lot. And I think I bet for a lot of people, even in who are pretty deep in the wellness world, they probably have parts of them that are like, I'm not fully clear on what that is.
Yeah. Well, I think of mindfulness as being this pretty wide and deep ocean of thought, philosophy, practice. But maybe one way to start kind of getting at what you were just alluding to was the idea of the witness, and being aware of your awareness immediately made me think of one of my favorite kind of definitions, or maybe laying out a practice for mindfulness comes from one of my Zen heroes, this fellow named Dogen, who was the founder of Soto Zen in Japan in the 13th century. And
Wow.
one of his beautiful statements is, to study the way is to study the self. To study the self is to forget the self. And to forget the self is to feel your radical connection with everyone and everything. And for me, what I love about that is when he's saying, first of all, when he says to study the way, what I believe he means is to study what it means to be a human being, to study what it means to be a conscious, full human being, is to study the self, which we all, I think we all get. But then he turns that on its head in a way that can be a little mysterious feeling and difficult, right? That to study the self is to forget the self. And I think there's where he's kind of aiming at a kind of ultimate aspirational freedom, freedom that we study the self in order to be free from self. And that we are free from self so that we can help others. And it's like, to me, this is the practice.
Yeah. So by helping others, it's a way of decreasing your sense of separateness, in a sense, from God, union, all, I suppose. What would you define as the self? If you're free from self,
yeah.
What are we being
So I
free
think we're
from?
free from, and again, I think there's, Zen often talks about, kind of small mind and big mind, or small self and big self.
Yeah, I love that.
Right. So I think we're talking about being free from small self, the self that is greedy and hateful. Greed. I think things like greed and aversion have been very popular for all of human history, and in fact, I think it's part of our own evolutionary biology that, in a way, we've evolved essentially to be alive, to stay alive, and to procreate, to pass on our genes, and greed and hate are pretty good for that in a certain way, but greed and hate are not so good for collaboration, problem solving, compassion, creating a sustainable, livable, thriving communities and planet. And so that's what I mean, by self. It's the small world where it's all about what's best for me, and not seeing from a much wider perspective. It's not moving from me to we.
Do you feel that it's in our human nature to be more inclusive and expansive, or do you, there's others who would argue the opposite?
I'm kind of a middle of the road, or inclusive. I think both. I think that as one of my Google scientist friends is very fond of saying that we are descendants of the nervous apes. And what he means by that is that we have built into us these incredible abilities to be aware of threats, and that there's a way that we are, unconsciously often and consciously we're scanning for threats. We want to know that we're safe. And I also think that this is partly why people's experience of the inner judge and the inner critic is also so prominent and strong. It's like there's this internal voice that wants us to be safe, that wants to make sure, we're not messing up. We're not in danger in any way. And so internally, externally, I think it's built into us, this scanning for threats. And I think this is part, I think, of the training. Part of why mindfulness training is so popular and so important, and I think so necessary, is to retrain ourselves. We don't have to worry. We're always going to have that ability to scan for threats, and as we should, but we want to also train ourselves to scan for safety and scan for what's possible, to scan for how are we more deeply connected.
Yes. Yeah, it's like watering the garden. It's like, what do we want to plant in a way?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's an interesting point. I mean, how do you, from a Zen perspective or from your own personal perspective, like when you think about big self and small self, do you ever feel like you're getting into an us versus them situation, or you feel like you're trying to push something away, and maybe that is sort of a hamster wheel of just that, trying to expel something? There's a concentration model. I mean, how does that manifest for you?
Yeah, this is where, at times, do I feel that at times? Sure. But mostly I feel like, in some way it's living your life and learning again and again from small self, right? Seeing how I can so easily, feel my own greed and my own aversion, feel my own ability to compartmentalize and my own, kind of wanting to be safe and making others into other. That's part of that. I have to be, part of this practice, I think, is to be completely honest with ourselves, and then at the same time to be open to seeing, oh, there I go again. I'm judging myself. I'm judging this other person, and to notice it, and to to again not then to beat myself up for having that thought or that awareness, but just like, oh, that's interesting. That's really interesting that I'm doing that, and to let it go and get on with whatever's next.
So is that the practice of mindfulness? Is that one way of sort of showing it in practice? That sort of non-attachment?
Yeah, I think so. I think it's to me, it's again using the words. You use the word awareness of awareness. I love a Zen teacher friend of mine is fond of saying, experience the experience that you are experiencing. And so, and in a way, to me, that includes, like, it's somehow really opening up to your sensations, your thoughts, your feelings, the whole package of humanness, and being, again, this is what I think, Dogen was getting at when he says, to study what it means to be a human being is to study the self. That we starting with really noticing what's happening, noticing how busy our minds are, noticing how judgmental we are, noticing how fearful we are, noticing, in fact, I can remember a meeting of Zen teachers in which, where people were being vulnerable. And I remember someone saying that, when they walk into a lecture hall, they can't help but notice how many pairs of shoes are there out there? And it's almost like, how many people did I attract? How popular am I?
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, and then laughing at yourself is like, wait a minute, I'm supposed to be a Zen teacher. I'm not supposed to be having, we're supposed to, I'm about to go talk about non-judgmentalness and, accepting what is. And it's hard. It's, here I am in that moment. It comes up, that thought comes up for me, how am I doing? How am I doing? It's a kind of scanning for threats. So again, it's noticing it and having I think it helps a lot to have a sense of humor about it.
Oh yeah. I think, would you say that, that the Zen has the best sense of humor as far as the meditators go? Because always they have the, they have the koans, like a Buddhist koan, so to speak, or all these like little riddles. Yeah. You've said a couple of them already, and they always have a twinge of humor, of the absurd.
Well, I think that, I sometimes walk into, these Zen places and seeing people sitting there facing the wall. It's like, this is hilarious. This is just hilarious, really. Or, and so much, when you really step back and look at these questions, like, how did we get here? Mm-hmm. Trying to remember, there was I saw, there's a TV I'm trying to remember the name. I just saw recently it's a new, like an HBO show about these, it's this couple. Maybe I'll think of the name of it. It's a fairly popular show in which, in the first episode, you're introduced to a couple, a husband and wife. And in the second episode, the husband dies in an accident. And I'm thinking, wow, this is an interesting show. Where's this going, that the main character dies? And then in the third episode, the woman dies. It's like, this is now really interesting. And suddenly you see them both, and they're both in some other place having died. And they're starting to kind of act out and figure out like what they're supposed to be doing. And the wife turns to the husband in this afterlife and says, "What are we doing here?" And he looks at her and says, "What were we doing there?" and so I think it's very funny. I think when you really open up to like these questions about being born and consciousness and what the hell are we doing here? And
I love these questions. It's like sort of I spend a lot of time more than I would like just asking myself, why are we talking on this podcast, and how did this happen? And
yeah. So this is when the Zen teacher though would hit you on the head and say, go wash your bowl, right? So there is this. What I love about again, and to me, to me, Zen practice is human practice. That human practice is that we love these big gnarly philosophical questions, and we should love these questions, and then cut your fingernails and pay your bills and brush your teeth and see also that even in these daily minuscule everyday things are just as important and potent as these large philosophical questions.
Do you find that like zazen or sitting practice, meditation in general, could become problematic if it's demarcated, like this is meditation time and now it's the rest of my life? Or how can we connect those dots?
Yeah, well, I think I think we need both. I think we do need. I think there is something. In fact, I sometimes talk about kind of dedicated practice and integrated practice, and I think so much of spiritual teachings. I think there is a reason that like the historical Buddha came up with the Four Noble Truths and the Eightfold Path, that things, we want things and we need things to be accessible and explainable. And at the same time, I think we need to know that these are just these are just ways, temporary, useful ways to delineate practice to help make it more easier and accessible, and not to get too hung up by them. So yeah, I think we need to have some kind of a way that we can step out of our lives, ideally on a daily basis, and to be able to do retreats. But then then the real question is, how do we bring that into our relationships, our work, and all part of our lives? How do we integrate it? How do we practice it? Yeah.
Sure. Yeah, it's like the absolute grist for the mill would be our day-to-day life.
Yeah.
I mean, one criticism sometimes I might hear about some of these older techniques and practices is one, just that they're old, but that they came from a male lineage. And you could look at even some of the like Hindu stuff, guys in caves, all men. And how is that, how do we change that for today? Or, what parts of that might be, what blind spots might we have for it being as part of modernity?
Sure.
And so is there anything that you see there that you're like, well, you take some of this, leave some of that, or is it more of a pure form when you look at Zen?
And recently there's been a lot of work unearthing the lineage of women teachers in the Zen tradition and other traditions. And it's funny. I think the males, the men seem to have better PR people, and maybe we're more concerned, with their status. But I think there have always been tremendous women teachers, and just now when I look around the world of spiritual teachers in many traditions, it's wonderful to see so many wonderful women teachers and people of color teachers. And I think there's, of course, there's tremendous blind spots and bias and racism, and all that stuff is a huge problem. And there's tremendous amount of work to do. But there's also some very positive signs when I look around at who's practicing and who's teaching.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about emotional intelligence as a concept. This is a phrase I love to think about, because I wonder sometimes, I usually use it as an excuse for why I can't connect with someone as an argument. It's usually something we use to look down. And I'm curious if you think it's something that can be taught, like is emotional intelligence something that is innate?
I think this is partly what I'm noticing. So, a lot of the work that I do is bringing emotional intelligence into the world of work. And I think that's a place where there is a really powerful understanding of how important emotional intelligence is for people collaborating, trusting, leading, following, all that stuff. And what's super interesting is that there's been a new kind of aha that the most potent way to teach emotional intelligence and in a way that can actually be successful and effective is to layer in mindfulness practice and meditation practice, because emotional intelligence is not, it's not like computer science. You can't just read about it and study it. You somehow need to become more aware of the body and need to, because the emotions are felt and expressed in the body. So there's some really interesting practices and research and science happening in this whole realm where mindfulness and emotional intelligence are coming together. To answer your question, I think there's a fair amount of evidence that we all seem to come into the world with maybe a certain set point around emotional intelligence. We all seem to be heavily influenced by how we were raised and by our parents, by close connections. But there's now, I think, a tremendous amount of evidence that you can actually shift and grow your emotional intelligence through practice.
I mean, what are some of these practices that can help us with mindfulness and emotional intelligence in our sort of day-to-day consciousness or is it something more that's like it's like a muscle you're training in meditation, or is it more sort of an awareness practice?
Well, now you're providing an opening that I'm going to take to mention my book, which is that in some way, part of why I wrote this book is that I wanted to present mindfulness practice from a slightly different perspective. And in a way, my answer, why it popped into my mind is that these 7 practices that I talk about in this book are at least a way to describe what I think of as mindfulness practice in action, right? So it's love the work, which is loving the work of self-awareness and helping others. Do the work. Actually, yes, have a practice. Don't be an expert. So cultivate a sense of beginner's mind. Let go of thinking you know who you are and what the world is. Connect to your own pain. Connect to the pain of others. Depend on others, and keep making it simpler. I love these practices, and I think each one of them is full and ripe and difficult, but together I think they're a really nice kind of path toward how I see kind of mindfulness practice in action.
Well, tell me more about connecting to your pain. I would imagine that's a larger subject. What are ways we can do that, and how do you define pain?
Yeah,
I think the world of that.
Yeah, I think there's the pain of getting what we don't want and not getting what we want. There's the pain of just feeling our own separateness, that from a certain perspective, we are separate as human beings.
And the pain of getting what we want.
The pain of not getting what we want. Maybe there's also the pain of getting what we want, but I was saying the pain of getting what we don't want and the pain of not getting what we want are more kind of core pains. Just knowing that our lives are short, knowing the reality that we will lose, everything and everyone. That the pain of change, the pain that we are. We can't hold on. We can't hold on to things, even though we kind of want to. But everything around us is changing, and it's not just technology. But that's one of the things that can be challenging is how much change there is in technology and how we ride that particular wave, and the internal and external changes that are happening all around us.
Well, like when you say connect to your pain, I think about grief. And sometimes it's more like it's the opposite feeling. People are so consumed by the pain that they want to distance themselves from it. And they're looking for ways to use mindfulness or similar techniques as a way to mitigate their or to ease the pain, really, or just to get through it.
Yeah. Well, I think, again, this is I think it's I think there's a real danger. The usual way, I think, is people tend to push away anything that's difficult, any sense of longing or loneliness or something missing. So again, this is one whole area is leaning into that and getting to know our own sense of longing and separateness and loneliness. You were starting to touch on, I think, a whole nother area, which I think gets a lot more complex and difficult. The whole idea of trauma and and a lot of and I don't want to underestimate that at all. There's a lot. It can be surprising when we see how much how much trauma there is. And from a certain perspective, we all have to deal with pretty difficult events in our lives.
Yeah, I mean, it is obviously complex and complicated, and like walking the walk as a human is one that there's no single answer or path. It's just one of, as you say, knowing yourself is a way of trying to summarize the mystery itself of it's why wouldn't it be what it is, which is to be alive, to be human is just pure epicness in all different directions, from joy to sorrow, and to loss and gain. And it's just, I mean, the disgustingness and the pure beauty and the amazingness and the creativity and the humor and all of it. It's just, it could not be richer, really.
Yeah. No, I think to me that's one of the. I think of that as almost a core. Again, if we're back to your very first question, which was around like what is mindfulness. Part of it is, I think, is experiencing the richness of being a human being and seeing that it's not that we don't need to add anything or conjure up something. It's more like when we drop our small self, what we find is this incredible richness that's always there that we can easily overlook.
So mindfulness in a way is a way of sort of tapping in consciously to our big self. And is there, I would say, science that's showing us that by doing that, there's a kind of muscle action there that is sort of engendering maybe a larger identification with our big self, or perhaps it's lowering anxiety and other factors?
Yeah, I mean, one of the science is fascinating. One of the interesting studies is around identifying what science is calling, the default mode network, which in a way is pretty close, or at least a fair amount of overlap with, I think, the language that we're using of small self. Mm-hmm. The default mode network is the kind of the part of us that is scanning for threats, is distracted, is ruminating about the past. It's the part of ourselves that's not just being with what we're doing. That's not just, as you were talking about, experiencing the richness. And you're probably familiar with. I think of it as a study that's gotten a lot of press, saying that that the average human being is in this distracted state about 50% of the time. People are now that doesn't mean that they're in some state of wonder, the other 50%, but about 50% of the time people are subject to this default mode network, this place of distraction. And usually when they ask people about their own emotions and feelings, people are it leads to being a state of unhappiness and dissatisfaction when we're not doing what we're just being focused on what we're doing.
Wait a minute. Unpack that a bit more. You're saying that people tend to be more unhappy when they are talking about how, as opposed to being in a flow state. Is that what you're trying to say?
That's right. Yeah, right. So again, this statistic. There's a study that shows, right, 47% of the time people are distracted, are not focused on what they're doing, and when they're in that state and they're asked how they're feeling unhappy and dissatisfied.
That's interesting. Yeah, I mean, some of this is, as people like to call it, first world problems, where it's like we're talking about even just being concerned about how we're feeling. Obviously, that's, I think, a core human element. It's just your state of being. But the fact that we can have the time and energy to think like, oh, I have the leisure to improve my mental state, or I have the room or the resources to explore that. It is our birthright, no doubt, but some people are so distracted by existential threats of their life or their health or whatever.
Yeah. Well, it can be very paradoxical in many ways. As I also was thinking that sometimes when I travel to poorer areas of the world or places where there is a lot less resources and a lot less technology, what I find is that people are much, much more focused and centered around their relationships with other people,
Yeah.
with family,
Yeah.
with community. So that's a bit paradoxical. That yes, anyhow. I understand what you're saying, right? Having that it feels like a first world problem, but it really has become a first world problem in
Like a
the
symptom of it. Yeah.
the lack of people taking the time and valuing emotional intelligence, humanness, relationships, and getting more and more kind of pulled into this world of success, of busyness, of technology, and not losing sight of how valuable and important these relationships and emotions are.
Yeah. Are you optimistic about? I feel that we're coming full circle as a culture, or at least we're sort of being forced that way by going so far outside of the nest with technology and advancement, and then we're using that technology to bring us back to the nest. Whether it's a meditation app or whatever it is. You could even say this podcast is a form of that. It's another kind of technology, but we're really like a lot of it is coming back to the basics. And I know for myself, a lot of my work is like literally recording wilderness sound
Right.
that I find that's touching my heart and bringing it into this digital form to music so people can experience who aren't there as a way of connecting them to that space. In that space, there's something about that that's been part of us for millennia. And it's probably has in it, because we're so used to it, it's in our bones, it's in our genes that is home.
Yeah.
And we just sort of been away from home. We're homesick for ourselves.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I don't know how you feel about, because, when we were at Esalen, I think that was the time, I don't know if we were both part of that sort of talking series about technology, and maybe that was a time before, but Esalen is being near Silicon Valley. It's a subject that's on the spear tip right now of a lot of people's minds about how technology is pushing us away and how people can use it to bring us back, and also how they monetize all of this. And some people think it's just like a total shit show, and others think like, no, this, we're going to eventually figure this out. Right now, it's just an early use of a tool.
Yeah.
What do you think?
Yeah, the question, am I optimistic? I couldn't help but think of one of my favorite quotes is by Wendell Berry, who's a fifth generation Kentucky farmer and writer, and he said, "Be joyful, though you've considered all the facts." And so I love that paradox in that the facts are pretty grim. There's a lot of grimness, but there's also a lot of possibility. I've read a lot of great books, I feel like, in the last 12 months. One is a book called Sapiens by Yuval Noah Harari, and in a way, there's a lot of history in that book, and kind of a broad stroke of the development of human culture and thinking and religion and technology. And one of the takeaways that I came from that book and from his thinking is that it's really hard to predict what's going to happen in the future. It's really hard that things, events happen, technology happens, a leader comes in, and things can get incredibly bad, and things can get incredibly good, and it's really hard to say, So I like the Wendell Berry quote a lot, right? To me, it's a reminder to really consider all the facts, to not shy away from the devastation, the climate change, the violence, the daily craziness that's coming out of Washington D.C. and at the same time to have some kind of faith in human, the human beings and the human condition, and also to take as active a role. Like I feel like I'm doing everything in my power to work with people to try and help people be as connected, open, compassionate as I, to play whatever small part I can play, and to help train other people to do this work. So I think it's all of those things.
Yeah. Well, if you had to give advice to someone who's sort of new to this path of mindfulness, what advice would you give them as a place to start, or a practice maybe they could put into practice right away?
Yeah, don't wait. Start some kind of a mindfulness practice, a meditation practice. Find people to sit with. Even if it's virtual, but ideally, whether it's a person or a few people, there's something. I don't think this was ever meant to be an individual sport. I think there is something potent about sitting with others, practicing with others, and just find a teacher, work with teachers, make time for reading, and make time for spending time in nature. I'm looking forward to I do an annual week in the High Sierras with some friends every year. That it's just really nourishing to have that time. But I try and, I'm lucky. I live north of San Francisco, where it's pretty easy to be out in and in touch with trees and creeks and ocean. So, and read poetry. I also think there's something potent about having poetry in your life. So those are some of my off the top thoughts.
I like that. So when you are teaching these sorts of things to people or businesses, or like the Google stuff you've done, like the search inside yourself, are these, would you put that under the banner of guided meditation, or is that part of it?
Yeah. Guided meditation is a part of it. I think a big part of what I feel like I'm teaching is helping people become better listeners. Starting with listening to yourself, right, to your own deep voices and aspirations and fears, and also this practice, this incredibly simple yet radical practice of really listening to other people, being curious, developing a sense of curiosity about who other people are and what they're thinking and what motivates them. And these are really essential practices in the workplace and every place, right? Whether it's in our family lives or whether we're actually going to find some solutions to some of these gnarly, larger problems that we've created for this planet.
Well, it's a really wonderful gift that you can give to others, is for them to really feel heard.
Totally.
Yeah.
Totally.
And I know sounds simple, but until you really recognize the ways, what makes yourself feel heard, and that's a beautiful gift to give to others. It can solve a lot of problems in relationships.
I love it's something that, I don't work that much with couples, but occasionally, and there's a beautiful question that the Zen teacher Thich Nhat Hanh recommends, that as a practice for couples that they do on a fairly regular basis, which is to ask the question, please tell me, how can I love you better? Mm. And I think that's just so potent.
Yeah. It's a beautiful invitation.
Yeah.
I don't mean to put you on the spot, but I'm feeling like it might be interesting to put this into practice even for a couple minutes. If you might want to sort of talk us through perhaps either a little mindful meditation, or it could be anything. You could also read a bit from your book if there's a section that might take us into a particular place. but I might like to have something a little experiential.
Sure. What if we sit together for like 2 minutes?
Sure.
How's that?
Yeah, we've done that on the podcast. It's almost awesome.
Yeah. So just noticing what it's like being here, making the transition from whatever we've been doing, from talking, listening, engaging, and letting it all go, and maybe taking a deep breath or two. And what is it like to shift from the activity of the day to just stopping? What is it like to stop, bringing awareness to the breath, bringing awareness to the body? Checking in with the body, noticing any places where you might be holding or tense, and just noticing, relaxing, checking in with the breath, and not trying to change anything, but just being curious about this breathing that's happening, always happening, that we usually don't notice. Maybe just bringing some awareness, maybe like a childlike quality, to seeing that this breath is new, is fresh, will never happen again. What is this breath? And letting thoughts come and go, especially any ideas that come up about doing it right or doing it wrong, or to-do lists, and keeping it simple, coming back to the breath, coming back to the body, allowing for your full experience. What is it like being here, being alive? Whatever your experience is right now is okay. And then let's maybe take noticing one more breath, and gently bringing our attention back to being here with each other again. Hey, thank you for that invitation, and thank you so much for this conversation.
Yeah, it's really lovely. I mean, it's always nice to have someone else take you in, take you out, and just be able to turn off for a second.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, I am looking forward, when I get back to Boulder, to checking out 7 Practices of a Mindful Leader. I believe that's the one they sent me, I hope.
That's it. The great subtitle, Lessons from Google and a Zen Monastery Kitchen.
Oh, yeah. I like it. And where do people find you, or find more if they want to dig in a little deeper?
Yeah, they can find me these days at marclesser.net, and that's Marc with a C.
MarcLesser, and that will be in the show notes as well if they just want to click on the link.
Beautiful.
Well, I hope to cross paths with you, if not at Esalen again, somewhere else in the world. And now I feel more connected, which is always the best part of this podcast, just putting aside time to learn more about other people. Do you feel heard? I hope you feel heard.
Totally. I've enjoyed this immensely. I— felt connected to you when we met at Esalen, and I'm sure that our paths will cross again.
Wonderful. Thanks, man.
Thank you. Take it easy.
All right. Thank you, Marc, for giving us your time. If you get a chance, check out his book. He's got several other books and videos online, and I'm sure he's a really sweet guy. So check it out. His podcast, or I'm sorry, his website is there in the show notes down there if you want to scroll down. But thank you for giving this podcast a review. It makes a big difference. And we need a review. It's been a little bit. Please go down there. Write a few sentences. Certainly you can give it a little 5-star review. That takes about half a second. But if you have 30 seconds or a minute, type a few things in, because I read them. It helps me not just speak into the void, and other people see it too, and then they take a risk and they join us in this community and join us on this podcast. So I'll see you soon. Please check out eastforest.org and you'll see all those live dates. That's where you can also sign up for the East Forest retreats. We've got the one in Esalen over the summer solstice in southern Utah in end of September. But otherwise, I will see you soon. March 20th, Boise, Idaho, Tree Fort Music Fest. Chapter 2 of Ram Dass is coming soon. I cannot wait to share these additional tracks with you. There's just so much stuff in there I want to share with you, and it takes a lot of patience for me, but it's happening. It's happening. So thanks for all your kind words on social media, and thanks for sharing the stuff on social media as well. It means a lot. We're all in this together. It's a movement, and we're making it happen. So you keep walking your walk. Don't take any shit. May the forest be with you.
I love my pain.
Do it all with grace. Peace.
My wheelchair. I love you all. I love the whole universe. We love everyone by inhabiting the soul.